senseis. I would like to use this occasion to ask for your understanding of this very important first line of Bushido, which says that warriors should be always ready to die. How does it apply to the Aikido training, to your practice? How much is working on the level of metaphor and how much you take it as a practical thing? I was also recently reading a book from totally different tradition of Carlos Castaneda, where he says about warrior something very similar, that he need to walk beside him with his dead all the time. He need to be familiar, he need to know. So there is something about that in all around the world. What is your understanding of this question?
Maybe I will start in this direction. So I will. The first thing which comes to my mind is we are not the sport, and we are martial art. So there must be something deeper than just getting physically better in something. And most of us, we have like a deep and long relation with the Chiba sensei, and this is what he would say. He would say like martial art is, after all, just the way to get ready to die. And in a world of people who are studying something which is not going to be, for most of them, profession, they're not going to get medal, there must be deeper meaning. And from historical point of view, like a warrior has to get ready to die, because in a medieval battle, probably 60–70% of the people will not survive. That's the reality. Even randomly, you can be brilliant warrior, but the random arrow will kill you. It's nothing. So there are only a few ways to get ready. There will be religious, of some kind of meditation, to be ready for that, because the act of fighting is risking life. Like it or not, doesn't matter how good you are. So for me, yeah, this is like a very, very first thing I have in my mind.
It's not an easy question to answer, I have to say. It's a challenging question. So one of the things that comes to my mind is there are many traditions that talk about people already being dead. That even though they're walking, talking, eating, breathing, essentially they are already dead. And so I think that's a concept that needs a lot of thought and study. And so in terms of living and dying, the practice of Aikido and the related practices that we do, like Zazen and Misogi Harai, is very much about learning to wake up in these bodies that we are living in right now. And so the process of waking up through the practice necessarily has to understand that there's a temporary nature to it, and of course, at some point, everything ends. And the beauty of the practices we do is that everything we do has a beginning and an ending. Every technique has a moment at which it begins and a moment at which it ends. Every class has a moment it begins and a moment it ends. Every sit has a moment it begins. So we are constantly bringing our awareness to this transient nature of everything through the encounter and the practice that we do. And you could say that outside in life the same exists. You go to the supermarket, there's a beginning to going in, and then but our focus is not necessarily being trained on this aspect of starting, finishing, opening, closing. And so I think through the practices that we do, we are constantly reminding ourselves that everything is transitory. Everything will end. And just to close, what it allows us to do, hopefully, is to have a more awakened existence in which the time we are alive, we are actually living in a more fully and rich way.
Yes, I would agree exactly with what Toko said. And are we ever existing in this moment, really? I mean, am I ever really perceiving this moment that's arising and you could say inhabiting that moment? And because of this, the reality of radical impermanence, that everything is arising and passing moment to moment. As Toko was saying, there is like a life and death of every moment. This breath in, this breath out, this moment being born, it abiding or appearing to abide for a time and then dying. It's happening all the time. And yet, the way we look at each moment of life is that this experience that I have will last, or this relationship I have will last, or this encounter I will have will last, or and then there's a kind of clinging to those moments, right? Trying to hold on to them, or holding on to life. And I think that if we can look at practice in a very fresh way and see that this moment is unique, it's here and then it's gone. Or if you want to use the words, it is born and then it dies, you can use that. That will lead to a deeper appreciation of being just where we are. But without that study, without this study of impermanence and the study of life and death, we tend to take things for granted. And in a very real way, like Piotr sensei was saying too, that maybe now there's a probability of me physically living longer. And I think in days of old, it wasn't guaranteed, right? You could die of a toothache or you could die of something very easily, not to mention in battle. But perhaps we've grown a little bit kind of taking that for granted, that it's probable that I'll wake up tomorrow. But it's not necessarily so. Right?
At the risk of being a little redundant, I feel like we're kind of in the right neighborhood already. For me, probably one of the first times this started to occur to me was in misogi practice. It occurred to me that what if, this is in Japan, right? What if there was an earthquake right now and this is my last chance to give my best effort? That's a very real possibility. It could happen right now. This is an old building. This could fall down on us as we're doing this interview right now. So knowing that that's the truth of the way the world works, how would your behavior change? How would your effort change? How would your attention change? And I think that I think that we're using a different tool by using martial practice as a way to sort of sharpen that focus and sharpen that attention. We're trying to help people to be as alive and as present as they can be. Because I think that's what it means to be ready to die, meaning that you are so completely consumed with, you're so completely alive in that moment that whether you live through it or don't live through it is no longer your concern. And that's the level of engagement in our life that I think we're aspiring to. That you truly have no regrets because you've combusted everything that you need to combust in that moment. So I think that what we're trying to create, we're trying to cultivate, is that awareness of that's the kind of engagement we want to have in our life. And maybe we can only have it in these focused moments, but through that practice, maybe with your children, you can be more present. Maybe with your partner, you can be more present. Maybe in your job, you can be more present. So that if that life was taken away from you, which happens to all of us at some point, you could in that moment feel like, yeah, I was in it 100%. And that's the best any of us can do.
So how, with this very important heritage, which is hidden inside of martial art practice and in the things we do here, how to bring it to the students in the dojo and how to introduce to them this layer of a practice without a risk of banalizing it, also knowing that a word of nowadays maybe give this suggestion that we are safe, that the life is given forever, for granted. Yeah? That how to work with the students in order to bring them into this topic in the way that they will start to take it serious. Do you have an experience how to transmit this question into the everyday practice in a dojo?
Oh, I can respond to that. One of the things I've noticed just in this last period of practice is if you listen to the teachers just in the way they talk about practice, there is already in their language an understanding of life and death, and there's already an understanding of impermanence, and there's already an understanding of expansiveness and a whole different perspective. And I remember being around Chiba Sensei and other teachers, that just the dialogue and the way they spoke about things, and it could be something very simple, like the way they spoke about Ikkyo, or the way they spoke about, like Chiba Sensei when he would talk about a sword, within their language and their dialogue was this truth. And so somehow we receive it just through the very nature of being in their presence. And I think our job as teachers is to do our best to help our students open as human beings to receive as much as they can, so they can actually listen and they can actually observe and see. And that really, I believe, is the most important assistance we can give to our students to take their understanding maybe in that direction.
I think there's something that, because as a teacher, I'm probably the least experienced here, but I've been around many great teachers I've been fortunate to be around a lot of great teachers for a long time. And one of the things that I found really interesting was, rather than by dragging it into the serious, and this is life and death, and being in this moment, the heavy works for some students, but also humor and lightness works for other students and other situations. Like in my time at Ichikukai, I saw many people go deeper because they were almost joked into it. They would say, "Oh, Ryugan, you're already perfect. You don't need to do any more deep Zen training. Like, you're already good." And then you laugh and you go home, but then you think, "I should train a little harder," or they would kind of tease you into it. And through a light touch, it almost dares the student to say, "Actually, I can get strong. I can go deeper than that. I can get stronger than that." Because if you throw it in their face, like, "You should be doing more of this. You should be this way," then they want to push back, or they rebel against it, or they get intimidated. What Hiruta Sensei used to talk about, and I think this is not unique to him, but it's like the chick that's inside the egg and the mother chicken, and the mother hen will peck, 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 peck at the shell, and the baby inside will like peck, peck a little bit back, and then the mother will peck, peck again, and then the baby chick will peck back. And then pretty soon, the pecking from the inside starts to get strong enough to break the shell on their own. But it's this interplay of a little bit of giving and a little bit of receiving and a little bit of giving. You give them these opportunities to step up. Maybe it's a dare, that they need that a little bit of a challenge. Maybe it's a little bit of a joke to make it feel like it doesn't have to be so scary. You can take this step. You're enough to take this step. It makes them feel confident enough to bust out of the shell a little bit. So I think it's two things. It's that it doesn't always have to be heavy to have a heavy effect. And the other thing is the interplay back and forth, teacher and student.
I would say that it depends on several things, but one is obviously the understanding of the teacher. So if their understanding is deep, perhaps it can be relayed, right? So it really depends on how far the teacher themselves has gone. And then the question that you're kind of posing and that Adam is touching on, is a question of transmission. And just because a teacher has a very deep understanding does not mean that they can transmit that. That's a whole different question. So one is a question of the level of the teacher. The second is a question of transmission, if they can transmit that to the student. And the third is really, is the student open enough to receive that, even if transmission is possible? So I think in terms of transmission, like Adam's saying, there's many different ways to do that. And I think if a teacher is, maybe you could say wise or clever, that they have several different tools. Maybe they need the heavy approach, the humor approach, the dare approach. There's many different ways. But as we know, there's many good teachers, or many good, I would say, practitioners that have gone very deep, whether it's Zen or Aikido, but they can't really transmit it to the student.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, especially in our case, having full-time dojo, it's puts us in a situation where it's much easier, because you like it or not, but we are at this age that this death is around us. It's not the concept anymore. So we were trained by Chiba sensei about this concept, but after that we had to deal with his death. And after that, you know, our other teachers, they passing, and our friends. It's a time when our parents are dying too. So this death is everywhere. It's part of our dojo. So it's enough to be a conscious member of the dojo to see it. Because if I think about the teachers who are like 20 years older than us, you know, it's like a funeral every day, like Ichikukai community. We're dealing it. It's not a theory. It is like every day there's less people at the table. Yeah. So it's not the like a concept anymore. This is something real.
Actually, that was my next question. What about this level of something inspiring and something hidden inside of the practice? We could say metaphorical level of this consciousness of our end, of our death. And when on our path we start to meet a real thing, people starting to die, and how much it does it possible to embrace it with the practice, to take it in? Does it help, or we are just confronted with something objective, with life? How much we can take a profit or a knowledge from this, what's happening also in our dojos, in relation with teachers, sometimes colleagues from the mat. Do you have this experience of, or a question from your own practice? How does it influence the dojo, the society, the practice itself?
Yeah, from my experience, it all comes through the teacher. So if something happens, I have a number of students, and I would say like more than half of them, they're living in this bubble of illusion, what they're doing there, and they're absolutely not ready to get this true. Like someone just died. No, they came here to have a fun. Aikido is a nice hobby. I want to get rest from the stress from my work or wherever. My wife yells at me, so I'm coming here. I'm not dealing here with some strategy, you know? And then my job as a teacher is to watch at the group and say, okay, this experience is going to be really constructive for him. He's ready to be part of it. So it used to be, in our dojo, it used to be I ask students to help me in a funeral company to change the guy who died, and he wanted to be buried with the gi. This is like really strong experience, and most of the people are not ready for that. I'm not coming for Aikido for that, you know. So I think it's our job, in a way. But like we said before, like a few generation dojo is going to deal with this. It's going to be part of it.
I think the Buddha said that there's three things that need to be studied or realized to awaken. And one is the nature of impermanence, one is suffering, and the other is that there is no self. And I think to the degree that you understand impermanence, or that one sees it, but not just, you have to really experience that. And that can be through the loss of your parents, or your father, your mother, your teacher, or other students, like Piotr sensei saying. But when you have that experience, and then you start to understand that life is ever changing and that there's absolutely nothing to hold on to, it affects your Aikido. It absolutely affects your Aikido. It can't be other than, right? It's like Toko sensei was saying, how Chiba sensei spoke about certain things. And I remember growing up listening to my father and to Chiba sensei later and other people, and you could feel there was a weight in their words, or a weight. And now I understand that. At the time when you're growing up, sometimes maybe you think like, wow, this person is just so heavy, like, right? What's up with that? And then you start to understand like the depth that they've experienced, that impermanence, that they understand some of the suffering in life. They understand the radical emptiness of things. You know, that is it's something you can't pretend to know. But when you know it and you see it in somebody, you see it.
I mean, the truth is that the greatest teacher is life. And whether we like it or not, life will teach us these lessons. And exactly as Ryugan was saying, that now I look at the generations that they're here this period, and of course there are young people who are hopefully, if they're lucky and fortunate, have not yet encountered the loss of someone special. But then you look at the next generation and you're aware that they will have encountered that. And with this begins a depth of a different way of viewing life and everything about it. And I often think for my kids, enjoy the ignorance of youth, because as life comes, it will teach you the hard lessons. So in some ways, I don't feel as a teacher that I need to worry about that aspect. On the contrary, I think about giving people tools in order to deal with the harsh truths of life, and that's what I hope that these practices can be for people, is strong tools so they can stand up and keep their back straight when the hard lessons of life start to strike.
To build on that I think a lot of times what we're dealing with is not the fear of death, it's the fear of going towards death. You know, when death happens, the light's out, we're done, right? That part is easy. But the sickness and the suffering and the weakness and the effects on the people around them, that's what frightens people. And something, as you guys know, I barely knew Chiba Sensei. I had other teachers. One of my formative teachers, Kubota Sensei, he demonstrated a lot of this in Aikido and in his life in a few different ways. But one of them, and I wrote it for Biran at one point, I think, but he used to tell us, when you throw people, don't be concerned if they fall or if they don't fall, right? Don't even think about it. When you throw like the old style kokyunage, your head is turned the other way. You're not even concerned if they fall or if they don't fall. And he would try to tell us that we shouldn't concern ourselves with whether it's working, it's not working, they're falling, they're not falling. Don't be concerned at the outcome. And I think that maybe wasn't the best way to explain it to us at the time. That there's a lot of reasons for that. It was confusing. But when I saw it in him as an individual, he has been hospitalized with liver cancer 3 times now. And he's beat it every time. But the important thing about beating it, not beating it, whatever, he's lucky for a number of reasons. He is totally unperturbed with whatever they throw at him. If it comes out, all he does what the doctor tells him. He goes to the hospital, eats what they say, doesn't eat what they say, whatever. But the result, how it turns out, is not his concern. He is immune to the fear. And the fact that he's built that from his practice of, he just moves his body, how he moves his body. People fall down, people don't fall down, not his concern. He gets a diagnosis, he does what he has to do, he goes through his life. Maybe he dies, maybe he doesn't die, not my concern. So to create that unperturbable spirit, that no matter what happens, your life, you're just going to keep putting one foot in front of the other, that's a great fortress to build for your soul, I think. And I think that's a precious teaching.
I think this is what, at least I remember from being Chiba Sensei weapons uke, or not even weapons, you know, it was like, if you're really afraid, you're gonna get hit. Yeah. If you give up and you're ready, as you said, I take whatever comes, suddenly you're safe, you know. And yeah, that was one of the phases of this.
And you may still get hit, just like we're all gonna die, right? But whether you have to live with the fear or not is your choice, and it's part of your practice.
Thank you very much, senseis, for this conversation. I think we stop here. Thank you, that was a pleasure to hear all that thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.